Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host. So, I guess this is going to be another random thoughts video, but first of all, I think a lot of people have heard about it. Somebody mentioned it in a comment on a previous video. I also talked to Lyle at No Hippie Trucking and Transportation today. We talked about it briefly, and also Million Mile Man put up a video, but there's a driver who's a YouTuber, and it's EKM Trucking or EKM Transportation. I think his name was Ernest. I had some interaction with him. I know he was a subscriber to my channel, but he lost his life in a crash down in I guess southern Arkansas on I-49. Million Mile Man has a clip from the local news. I don't know what happened. Truck went into the woods, caught on fire. So I don't know if he had I just don't know what happened. But apparently they didn't mention it at the safety meeting. And the thing I said to Lyle, by the way, his channel is still up if you want to see any of his videos. It's EKM. I think EKM, like I said, Trucking or Transportation. But one of the things that, I said to Lyle is I said, too often, people in businesses that are dangerous will gloss over facts or circumstances that led to an employee injury or death. And I said, it's not, and a lot of times it'll be like, well, we have to be respectful of the family. And let me say this, I am heartbroken to hear about this loss, right? Like he was somebody's son. I think he might have been married, but it doesn't really matter, right? It's a significant loss, period, right? And he was important to people. But here's the thing, right? I've never believed that you honor somebody's memory by being like, oh, we can't talk about that. And I was in the fire service. I was a volunteer firefighter, but in a very busy area. I answered a lot of calls some years. I would answer well over 100 calls, in a year. And every call has risk, right? Even just getting to the fire station, sometimes it's risky. And, the thing is that I would always sit in our radio room and read breakdowns of firefighter line of duty deaths in the hopes of learning. And because the National Fire Protection Agency or whatever administration, if somebody dies in a fire, a firefighter dies in a fire, they go out and they totally dissect the whole situation, right? And then they tell everybody about it. Why? Not to say, oh, look at what this guy did wrong, right? Because you could be doing everything right and still lose your life in a fire. Just like you could be doing everything right and still lose your life out here, And so, I would read those things to try to understand, okay, what were the warning signs maybe? What was going on where a firefighter or multiple firefighters ended up dead at a fire scene? And the same thing in the military. If you were in the military, that nobody really, if it wasn't blatantly obvious what happened to somebody in a on-duty death, there would be a report. Now, there's not a report if there's combat and somebody gets shot and then they die. I mean, we kind of know what happened, right? But when it comes to aircraft mishaps, ship mishaps, vehicle mishaps, we would always get these reports. Like the Navy has the Naval Safety Center. I'm sure the other branches of service have the same thing. whenever there's a huge loss of equipment or a loss of life, serious injury, it's dissected. And I really think that the trucking industry does a disservice to the public, but specifically to its drivers by not doing that. Because we're not going to change the facts, right? So let's just be honest. We had a driver that something happened. I don't know if he made a mistake. I don't know if it was bad road. I mean, some roads are so bad that I could see them causing wrecks, I don't know if it was in a construction zone. I don't know if a herd of deer ran out in front of him. We don't know. Now, we might never know, but the police are investigating. I'm sure the company is going to get a copy of that report. Why wouldn't they share it? I don't care if this guy was doing all of the most stupid things you could ever do in a truck. It would still be useful information to know. And you know what? I had a guy one time. This is when I was in high school, and he was a ranger, Army Ranger, and he had done a couple tours in Vietnam. And we were doing this Q&A, and I had brought him to my school. I was doing a project, and I got him to come and speak to this class of mine. And somebody in the class said, "Hey, if somebody dies in will you stop? Just lay down. If somebody dies in combat, do you bring their body back?" And of course the answer is yes, but what he said has always stuck with me, obviously, because I'm 61 years old. He said, "If you were dead, would you care?" And here's the thing, saying somebody made a mistake, like if something happens to me tonight when I get on the road, I would like people to know what happened. If I did something wrong, I want it honors my memory if you know what I did, so you don't do the same thing. So somebody else doesn't get the state police knocking on their door at 2:00 in the morning saying, "Hey, your loved one got killed in a truck crash in, Mink Piss, Wyoming." And then you got it, your whole world comes crashing down, right? So I would want people to know, did I screw up? Or was it something I didn't have control over? There's nothing wrong with that. It's not dishonoring people. I had friends killed in the military. I know exactly what happened to them. And, what to do to prevent it in the future. Because if you don't care enough to stop the next one, then you don't care about any of your people. And if you think I've said enough. So I'm sorry to hear about. And again, I think his name was Ernest. I think that was his first name. I'm sorry to hear about him. It's just super unfortunate. And we shouldn't hear about it through the rumor mill. We shouldn't hear about it on Facebook. We should hear about it from the horse's mouth, from the company. And I honestly feel like the company should be footing the bill for, if somebody's killed in their truck and they're doing their job and then, they weren't doing anything wrong. When I say wrong, I don't mean they didn't make a mistake, but I'm saying they weren't drunk, or high or whatever. The company should be paying for the funeral. They should be paying to transport the body back to wherever the person's from. They should be making it as easy as possible on that family. I don't even know what the policy is on that. So let's talk about a couple of other things on a less heavy subject. So as you may know, University of Colorado football team got kind of whooped up on by Oregon last weekend. But what was, and you could kind of see that coming. Oregon's probably a pretty good football team, and Colorado is a new team. But I was really, I wish I could say I was surprised at the reaction, but it was like it was like a lot of people were like, oh yeah, that needed to happen. Coach Prime was talking trash, and I'm just like, I kind of have never heard that. There's been a lot of people talking shit about Coach Prime, and pretty much they're all white. And I'm like, a lot of teams get whooped up on, but would you want a team that didn't think they could win a game? Like, would you want a coach that was like, yeah, we're gonna get killed, we're gonna go there and they're gonna beat the shit out of us? Do you think Gary Payton would have kept his job if he was like, look, we're gonna fly across the country to South Florida, and I've watched Miami on film, and I've watched our own defense, and man, frankly, we suck. In fact, I'd rather just forfeit the game than go over there and stand on the sidelines for 60 minutes while the Miami Dolphins drop 70 points on my team. Like, would you want that guy as your coach if he was saying that, even if it was true? Of course you wouldn't. And I think that what we're seeing here is it bothers a lot of white people, especially white people in sports, especially white coaches, when a guy who has very little coaching experiences success at a high level, and his team is immediately in the national conversation, and immediately sucking the oxygen out of the room, and immediately generating hundreds of millions of dollars for his school. When he got signed, I think his deal is $29 million, I think $29 million 5-year contract, right? So a little over. So what is that? 5.8 a year or something. And so anyway, when he got signed, right, the AD at Colorado, they were like, "How are you going to pay for Coach Prime's contract?" And he was like, "I don't know, but we'll figure it out." Well, the way he's paying for, Deion Sanders and his program at Colorado and his players are generating I'm trying to swear less. They're generating buckets of revenue. I saw a number today. It was was it 290 million, or it was some huge number. It was hundreds of millions of dollars that he's generated. Man, that guy is a freaking prophet. Like, he's underpaid. He's underpaid for what he's done for that university. And here's the thing, all that money coming in goes to all the sports programs. He's improving the sports programs at the entire university, right? And I think, and people are like, I don't think it was a lot of hype, right? Like, he went out and beat some teams that he shouldn't have beat. So, of course, and rankings, I think a lot of times rankings are messed up, right? Maybe his team shouldn't have been ranked. But here's the other thing that I wanted to point out to the detractors. I went back and looked at Colorado football for 20 years. And by the way, I have a couple of friends that are Colorado alum. In fact, one of them, a good friend of mine, was on the offensive line at Colorado when Rashaan Salaam won the Heisman Trophy. And then this friend of mine also eventually, he played in the NFL, played for the Eagles, but years ago. But anyway, I went back and looked at 20 years, the last 20 seasons of Colorado football. And do you know that in the last 20 years, only 5 times, and there's actually going to be an asterisk for one of them, only 5 times have they finished above 500. I'm not talking about like had 9 or 10 wins. I mean even 500 or above. Only 5 times. And one of those seasons they were 4-2, because that was the COVID year when some schools, I don't even think were playing, right? And some schools, players were like, I'm not going to play because I won't get a shot or whatever it was, right? So that's an outlier, so get rid of that. So basically 4 times in 19 years, in 19 seasons, 4 times, they were even 500, right? That's not even a winning, 500 isn't a winning season. It's a even Stevens season, but it's not a winning season. Only 5 times in 20 years. I bet you Colorado finishes above 500 this year. And if it does, that means Dion is in that team over 21 years. They will have been only 1 of 6, but really 1 of 5 over 20 seasons to ever be over 500. Right? This is so all the haters can hate, but he's the most popular guy in the state of Colorado, I think. You know, I mean, and you know, so I wish him all the success in the world. And you know, you really do have to look at the criticism that he gets, and I think a lot of it is based on his race. I think that 3 years at a small school at HBCU, and then he's coaching in one of the most storied conferences, Power 5 conference. All these white guys that he jumped over feel like, you know, he didn't pay his dues or something. But here's the thing. Those coaches aren't in the NFL, aren't in the Pro Football Hall of Fame and the College Football Hall of Fame. Those coaches are not the only guy in the history of the world to play in both the World Series and the Super Bowl. Those coaches don't have any Super Bowl rings. And Colorado wanted him, not them. And it's just jealousy, and, you know, it's just, you know, it's bullshit. Okay, so enough about that. You know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I got a theory about a conspiracy. You know, I have been noticing, and sometimes I'm a little slow on the uptake, you know, like sometimes things are happening, but I don't notice it right away, because I kind of like, I'm focused on different things that you know, and so I just kind of like brush it off or whatever, or just don't notice it. But I started to notice that even people that you wouldn't think would be like jerks to truck drivers at Prime are just not being very nice. And I wondered out loud to somebody who's left Prime, that I was talking to on the phone the other day, you know, is there some concerted effort? Or is it just culture? Is it just like everybody's feeling pressure and everybody's quick to anger, or, you know, quick to criticize? Because, you know, I'm going to share this quick anecdote, and this happened with my payroll advisor, who has always been quite pleasant and helpful. In fact, I feel up to this point, I felt like this person was, you know, because I get gaslighted by my fleet manager, you know, just bullshit stuff sometimes, like, oh, if you don't do this, then X is going to happen. And I'm like, well, I'm not doing it. And then X never happens, right? And I'll get back to that in a second. But so I had this delivery in Corrine, Utah recently. And so, you know, normal stuff, right? Like, I go there. This actually was, no, it was a live unload. It was a live unload. So, because it was produce. So I go there, do my live unload, do the same thing I've always done at this same Walmart distribution center. And by the way, the same as it's been at every Walmart I've ever gone to, live or not, drop or live, it's always been the same thing. This has never happened before. So I get this message from my fleet manager. Hey, or not fleet manager, my payroll person. Hey, you need to submit a trip report when these bills for your trip are submitted. I was like, bills for my trip? I didn't even do that trip report yet, because I'm a procrastinator. I wait till the end. Some people do them right away. I never do them right away. Almost never. Unless I'm already up against payroll cutoff, you know. So I'm like, I didn't send those bills in, you know, because I keep them in one place before I process them, and then I keep them in a different place after I've processed them. So I'm like, so I look on my phone and I'm like, oh, these bills, because you can see documents that have been scanned and sent. I'm like, well, these are here, but then there's all these pages that I don't really even recognize, but there's not a trailer control report or trailer control record that you typically get at Walmart. I'm like, so I messaged back. I'm like, I did not scan those bills. And then they were like, well, they were emailed. And I was like, well, I definitely didn't email them. Well, you still have to do a trip. I said, why would I know? And they were like really butthurt about it. Like, I'm like, why would I know to do a trip report? Because then it turns out that Walmart, the Walmart distribution center, they did that. And I've delivered, because even when I was at night, I used to deliver to Walmart distribution centers fairly frequently, even doing dry van stuff. And Schugel, I delivered there. I don't think GP Transco we ever had stuff going to Walmart, but I certainly have been to Walmart distribution centers at least 100 times in my trucking career, at least 100 times over the past 4+ years, right? I mean, some weeks it's like you're at Walmart distribution centers 3 different times, So, and never once did they send the bills to my company, right? I always process them. And so I'm like, well, she's like, well, you're finished with the trip. I'm like, so what? I didn't really say this, but I'm like, why wouldn't it have been easier and just more kind to say, hey, just wanted to let you know that we already got the bills from Walmart, so if you could just scan a trip sheet when you get a chance, then we could just wrap this up. But no, they were like, you didn't do something you were supposed to do, even though it's totally inconsistent with everything I've ever done in the past, right? And, I was just like, what is going on? And then I get this message so the past week, I've rejected 2 loads, like 2 trips in a row. I rejected loads and got different trips, right? And on both occasions, the different trips actually paid more per mile. They were better trips for me. Now, I will say my fleet manager's on vacation again. And I don't know anything about the vacation policy, but man, that dude just takes a lot of time off. But for a guy that just works from home a lot of the time. But anyway, so I got the D League is in this week, and so I get a message from this person who says they used to be a truck driver, and and apparently think, and I don't know why they're not still, but whatever. So I get a message from them. I take this load to Virginia, to Salem, Virginia, just south of Roanoke there. And I'm sitting there, and they're like, so I take another load, and I'll get into that load in a second. And I took the other load because the load, to get me out of Salem, paid well. But what I didn't do is I didn't analyze that load very well. And I'll get to that in a second. But anyway, what happens is I get a message, and she's like, hey, as soon as you get to the 90, give us an ETA. Now, mind you, the 90 is like in Kentucky, south of Cincinnati, right? Like across the river. They're like, give us your ETA to Kansas City, Kansas, and then start heading that way. Now, I used to have a driver manager that would tell me, hey, head this way. Now, this is when I was a company driver, so it's not like I had a ton of choice. Even at night, though, I could reject a load. Company drivers could reject loads at night. But I really, really trusted my driver manager at night, and if he said, hey, Terry, when you drop this off, start heading this way, the planner's finishing up stuff, and then I'll get you the dispatch. And I would always just do, his name was Paul. I'll be like, yeah, sure, Paul, I'm on it, And my driver manager at GP Transco, if he said, head this way, I would always do that because, he would always take care of me. But so they were like, well, just, start dead heading to Kansas City from Cincinnati, Kansas City, Kansas. Now, I'm like, so I call her back and I'm like, hey, look, do that because there's no loads in your area. Now, I've been driving a truck long enough to know that there are loads in lots of places, especially Ohio, Indiana, and even in Kentucky. So I said, look, I'm not going anywhere until I already know there's a load I want. And she's like, well, you might just have to wait around there then. I'm like, okay. I said, or you could just give me a load that's closer by, that I don't have to frickin' deadhead 1,000 miles. And I'm willing to deadhead 1,000 miles as long as I get paid like $2,000 for that deadhead. But I'm not gonna deadhead to Kansas so I can haul a load that pays $1.74. Not gonna do that. So anyway, but here's where more of the gaslighting comes in. She just sent me a pre-plan picking up 70 miles from where I'm dropping off. Now, here's my situation with this load I'm on now. Remember how I said I didn't really look at it carefully? So it turns out this load, 590 miles with the deadhead up the Shenandoah. It pays well, but what I didn't do is I didn't say, wait a minute, I'm gonna have to run that 590 in one drive shift. Now, if you're just out in Nebraska and you're just running, right? 590 in an 11-hour drive shift, nothing, right? It's easy, right? 65 miles an hour, you got plenty of time. Plenty of time to get in 590, 600, 620, whatever, right? We all can do it. But what I didn't do is I didn't say, hey, wait a minute, I'm gonna have to drive 121 miles up I-81. Then I'm gonna have to do a drop and hook, which, is not on my drive clock while I'm there. I'm doing yard move or whatever. But then I'm gonna have to go from Edinburgh, Virginia, all the way back down to Lexington to pick up 64 westbound to come over to Kentucky, all the way through West Virginia in the middle of the night to go through Kentucky. And the shortest route is definitely some back roads. And I even called my former trainee Paul, because he's like from Kentucky. So is Jim C. He's from Grayson. And Paul was like, yeah, man, you want to turn there in Grayson by the chicken plant that I've picked up at and take the AA up towards Cincinnati, right? I made a plan. But I wasn't even to Beckley, West Virginia when I talked to Paul. But here's the thing. I had already called dispatch and said, look, I am up against my clock. I'm only going to have about a half an hour to spare. So if anything goes sideways, and I even admitted to the guy, I probably shouldn't have taken this load with the scheduling, right? Because it had to be in Hebron, Kentucky at 3:30 this morning. So I'm up against it because, quite frankly, 590 miles in an 11-hour drive shift is not hard in Kansas or Nebraska or, north, the Texas Panhandle, whatever, right? But when you got to go up and down the Shenandoah, then cross the mountains in Virginia, then go all the way through West Virginia, where absolutely nothing is flat or straight on a road, you're gonna have to really hustle. You're gonna have to be careful and hustle. And I was heartened by the fact that the load is only like 18,000 pounds. So I get to Beckley, and if you've come across 64 into Beckley, you come across and you're making a right-hand turn to stay on 64 west / 77 south, which becomes the West Virginia Turnpike. I get to Beckley, I make that turn. A couple miles later, they're like, the turnpike is closed. Follow Detour A. Now, mind you, I was only going to have about a half an hour of slack in this whole trip. And I was already accounting for my half-hour break. I'm like, okay, So I'm like, okay, they got it closed for, whatever, an exit. It shouldn't be, I should still be able to just, drive as fast as it's safe and get there on time, right? And once I got into Kentucky, I could roll a little faster down hills, and kind of book it a little bit. So I get on this Detour, and immediately as soon as I get on it, which is, by the way, it's US 19 North is the Detour, it says a Detour 126 miles. So I pull over quickly. I send a message. I'm like, hey, I am not gonna make this delivery on time. But I still thought maybe there's an outside chance I could maybe there's a miracle. Maybe I'm gonna overcome the time-space continuum. So I keep running hard. In fact, I was running hard enough that in my mind I kept hearing that voice, you're pushing too hard, you're pushing too hard. And I've heard that voice before. And so I got up, so this route takes you all the way up to I-79 north of Charleston, probably like 50 miles north of Charleston before it comes to 79. Then you're supposed to get on 79 south and go back to Charleston to pick up 64 east. That's the Detour. And if you look on a map, it's insane. And also the road, there are certain spots where it's 65, but you really shouldn't be driving a truck that fast down some of those hills because it's even worse than the interstate. It is 2 lanes each way. But then there's a whole bunch of traffic lights, there's towns, there's probably from the point you get on 19 to the point you get off, even though you go through a lot of woods, there's probably 25 traffic lights, and there's lower speeds, 45, 50 going through towns. So I get up to 79. I'm like, all right, let me just take my 2 hours. I take my or take my half hour. I take my half hour break, and while I'm as soon as I start my break, I'm like, start doing the math, right? Can I even make it? I have 4 hours, so I knew that once my break was finished, I would have exactly 4 hours and 12 minutes. 4 hours and 12 minutes on my drive clock. So I get on Google, and the reason I use Google is not because it's the best truck route, certainly, but because Google is always going to give you the fastest route, right? And it's going to give you the route that is, and that calculation is going to be based on you doing the posted speed limit at all times. And it doesn't take into account any construction. It does take into account traffic if other people are using the Google app at the time. But guess what it says? The time to get to my 90, 4 hours and 12 minutes. I have 4:12 on my drive clock, and Google says it's 4:12 to get there, but that's in a car. And if you can use the roads, they say. So I called dispatch. I'm like, hey, I sent you a message like 2.5 hours ago about the fact that I'm not going to have an on-time delivery and that I'm going to have to take a 10-hour break. What do you want me to do? And this dunce is like, and this, anybody who's in my fleet knows who I'm talking about right now when I said dunce. But he says, well, send me an ETA. And I'm like, okay, well, I won't know an ETA until I get stopped for the night, but I'm gonna have to take a 10. So then about a minute later, after I get off the phone with him, he sends me a message. He says, hey, you still got over 4 hours of drive time and 5.5 hours on your 14 clock. Like that really matters, right? And I was like, this guy is lazy as the day is long. Like, those bloodhounds you see on the porch in Tennessee that are just barely pick their head up when you pull in the driveway in a pickup truck. He's lazier than those dogs, right? And I know he did not bother to even think, well, wait a minute, this guy had to do at least a 2 hour reroute because he couldn't go down this road he was counting on. And And so I was angry enough. I was like, are you stupid? Like, and then I said, really, with a question mark? I said, Google says it's 4:12. I got 4:12 on my clock. Unless I was able to speed most of the way, there's no way I'm gonna get there. So I feel like you telling me what you just said is like you saying to either drive at an unsafe speed or ignore the hours of service requirements, and I'm doing neither, you know? But it was more of that disrespect and lack of like empathy, and so lo and behold, remember I told you about the gaslighting, right? Oh, you're not going to be able to get a load out of Cincinnati. I get a pre-plan 73 miles down the road. I think I told you that. But you know, I'm wondering, getting back to my conspiracy theory, and I know this has run long, but is there some concerted effort at Prime to just be as unfriendly, unhelpful, and unkind as possible in the hopes that drivers will just leave? You know, because and here's the thing, I was talking with this person the other day, and I said, you know, I said, when companies start to act that way, it's not the worst performers that leave, it's the best performers that leave. The best performers always leave first. You know why? Because people that tend to be the best performers are also tend to be the people that like have their eyes open and are paying attention to the tea leaves. They're watching what's going on all the time, right? That's why they're the best performers. And the best performers are also the ones that have an easier time finding a job elsewhere that they feel like they might be happy with. And I don't know if, you know, and Lyle's talked a lot about the culture shift that he's sensed at Prime, and he's been at Prime well over 4 years. So, you know, he's been at Prime more than twice as long as I have. And, you know, I kind of even see it, but like I said, he's been around a long time, relatively speaking, for the trucking industry. Now, I know there are guys that have been 10, 20, 25, 30 years at Prime, and you know, so they've probably seen several culture shifts. But you know, I just feel like he might be onto something, because I'm just like, you know, I feel like when I'm talking to a fleet manager or dispatch of any kind, that it's like this mind game. Like I gotta, like, it's like they're spies, you know? Like I gotta figure out what's the truth and what's a lie, and what they're saying. Because like I said, I rejected 2 loads and voila, got loads that were better. And I said, I'm not gonna deadhead to Kansas City until you tell me what the load is, and voila, I get a load that I'll pick up tomorrow, 73 miles from where I'm dropping off tonight, and that's going up to Toma, Wisconsin, and to the Walmart there, which is actually right next to where Schugel has a terminal. And while I don't know what I'll get out of Toma area, I don't know what I'll get out of central Wisconsin, I don't really care, you know, because it's a nice area. I got my bike with me if I have to, like, wait a day, and it's a 24-hour window, so I can drop it at an opportune time to get a new load right away. But anyway, if you hung this long, I appreciate it. Yeah, just keep Ernest's family in your thoughts. And you know, I don't know that we'll ever know the truth, and that's unfortunate for the reasons I said. But everybody be safe. None of this, you know, like I always say, if what was back here was important, I don't mean in my sleeper, I mean in the trailer. If this was important, they'd have put it on a plane. So anyway, I will talk to you guys later. Bye.